What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be looking at how you can mix your beat perfectly to get the best results every single time. I'm going to be dropping a lot of little gems in this one, so stay tuned and let's get right into it. Alright guys, we're going to break this up into 4 different components here. The first one's going to be effects, adding any finalizing effects or anything that you might need. Then we're going to be EQing it, we're going to be panning things, and then we're going to be dealing with the overall levels and getting the mix at a crispy level. So the first thing is effects. So effects can be anything from the different plugins that you're putting on your instruments to any automation or things like you're doing that in your beat. So one thing I think I could do with this beat is actually put some automation right before it goes into the drop here. So what I did is I took the auto filter plugin, which is an Ableton stock plugin, and I just filtered so it sweeps out right before the beat drops. And this is what that sounds like soloed. Alright, so it goes out ever so slightly, but it adds a ton of excitement right before that beat drops. Some other things you can do to make it, to spice it up, is to clean up the intro and have some like cool things going on at the very beginning of the beat so that the listener is like anticipating what's going to happen in the drop. So for example, I have this little vocal in the background, and this is just drawing the listener in. They're like, okay, this beat's about to be hard. Let's see how this sounds. So listen to it in the mix here. Just adds a little bit of excitement. And that beat just comes in twice as hard because we're doing these little elements here. We're introducing some weird vocals that they've never heard in the beat yet. And then we're also doing transitions like this. So if there's any transitions or weird effects and different things that you want to put in your beat, that is a very good place to start before we start actually getting into the mixing. So let's jump into the mixing part now. Okay, so this is just going to be EQing every single track and just making sure that everything sounds appropriate in the mix. So I have a lot of plugins going on these leads just to kind of drown them out and make them sound crazy, but we're going to look at the EQing that I did. Okay, so this is the bells that come in just every so often in the mix here. Okay, so what I ended up doing was taking out some of the highs because I wanted the main sound that I have going on here, the lead. I wanted that to kind of dominate the high range. I just wanted this to come in ever so slightly and just be like a weird little detuned bell that sounds good. So I also noticed when I was playing around with this frequency was a little too sharp. And this just cleaned up the sound a whole lot more once I took a little bit of that out. So I was just feeling around for things that I liked and didn't like, and I made sure to cut out all the lows. This is going to be one of the biggest things that you're going to want to do, is make sure you're cutting out a proper amount of each of the lows for each of the instruments. That way the 808 isn't fighting and arguing with anything else. So this one felt good right around 200. And a good way to know if you're taking out too much lows is just listening to the sound. Did it completely change the sound and it lose all of its flavor? If it did, you might need to leave some more of the lows in there. So let's listen to this one, for example. So it made absolutely like no difference at all whether I left them in or took them out. So because of that, I just took out more of them just for the hell of it. If it's not adding to it, we'll leave that room for another instrument to dominate. Okay guys, and one little tip on EQing is usually if you take a frequency out, you also want to add something back in just to fill in that gap. So I found a spot that I liked right here, and I just ever so slightly bumped it up. Okay, so now we're going to look at the main melody that I'm using here. Alright, so I cut out a bit of the lows for this one as well because this one is an arpeggiator and it has some bass elements to it, so I just wanted to make sure to get rid of those. So you can hear that bass in there. So I just brought it to a point where that bass is really no longer existent anymore. I noticed the beat was getting a little busy in the headphones and it was kind of muddy, so I knew there was probably a sound where it was super muddy. So what I ended up doing is I ended up like taking a point like this and sweeping it across until I found where it got even muddier, and it was like right at this point. So I ended up taking a little bit out there to save from some of the muddiness. Okay, so that was the mixing that I did for the instruments. One other thing I want to mention is getting them in the right stereo field. So there's a couple different kind of plugins you can use, but on each of these instruments I have them sitting at a different width in the stereo field. So this one's at like 2. You can see it's up pretty close. And then the bells that I have come in every now and again, I have those sitting a little higher at 2.24. So if you don't have a plugin to widen the sound already, you can use the utility here from Ableton, and then it has this big control over the width. So you can go pretty crazy with it, but be careful because it might make your mix sound weird. All right, now we're gonna go through the drums and just show the things that I did. So for the kick, I don't usually cut anything out of the kick. The kick's usually good to go. And this is just a second kick I have going on this track as well. For the 808 though, for the 808, I have it ducking the kick. So let me click on this section right here so we can take a listen to it. So you can see every time the kick hits, it's going to duck some of the frequencies of that. So what that's doing is this is a really clean way of sidechaining your kick and your 808 together without it completely ducking the noise or sounding bad. So what it's doing is it's just taking out the frequencies where the kick's hitting the hardest, and it's just relieving those of the 808 so the kick has room to shine there. So what you can do to find that frequency that you want to duck in your 808, you just go through here and you find the punchiest part of the kick. So it's looking like the kick's punching right around here. So I'd say that's 60 hertz. So what then you would go back and you would change what you're targeting on your 808 to that 60 hertz. Doesn't have to be perfect either. And then you got some really good sidechaining. And if you're wondering how I do this, I have a video on my channel. I'll link it up here at the top on how you can go ahead and sidechain your kicks using this method. All right, let's move on to the rest of the drums here. All right, so I have this snare, and it comes in every once in a while in the beat. So what I usually do with this snare, the only thing I really do is take out some of the lows. So I just took out some very basic lows. You don't have to go crazy on it. But you can see if I pull this back even more, it's going to start to lose some of its elements. Alright, so you just have to find the area that you think works the best without like ruining the sound at all. And on our other snare, it's pretty much exactly the same. It's going out right in the same area. You can take out a lot from the hi-hats. Some of the hi-hats have good frequencies in the 501K range, so definitely look out for that. But this one was a more sharper hi-hat, so I didn't have to worry about that. So if you had a lot going on over here too and it made it sound good, just, you know, move it over accordingly. Or you could even use a sharper plane here. Open hi-hat, same deal. Okay, you can see it's pretty much all at the top here, so we didn't even really need to do it, but just as another precaution, it's always good to do that. Okay, I have another hi-hat. This is the main one that plays, and I did pretty much exactly the same thing. I made the slope a little bit longer, because these open hi-hats that are like this tend to have a little bit more in this range as well. So, and then for the FX and the weird things that I put at the beginning, I didn't actually EQ those at all because the 808's not hitting, and I wanted the beginning to sound gritty anyways. So don't worry about doing those things. And then I have this texture that you probably didn't even know was there that plays the whole time. It's just like a jungle noises with like rain dropping and things like that. And if you have textures in the background, you definitely remove the lows with them. Especially if you have it playing the whole time, that can interrupt with your 808 very, very easily. Okay, so on the whole drum group as a whole, right here, I have an EQ, and I always put this on my drum groups. It adds just a little bit of highs here, because when the 808's playing, it can drown out a lot of the drums and a lot of the nice transients that they have. So when you rise these back afterwards, it comes back and it sounds a lot more sharp. And what I do is I actually subtracted a dB here because that's about how loud the addition of those frequencies was. Okay, so that was EQing. Now let's talk about panning. Panning is very important. So like you saw with the instruments here, I have those at different widths in the stereo field. So those are going to be towards the back of your fucking ears. The kick in 808 could be in mono. Some people like to put a little width on their 808. That is totally up to you, but I keep them in mono for the most part. I just turn the voices down to 1 here. Turn the voices on 1 for my 808 as well, so it's not playing multiple voices at a time. So I don't do any crazy panning or anything with the kick and 808. Those are just going to sit in the middle. Those are the things that we want to dominate the middle range. But the drums, on the other hand, is a different story. So with the drums, I don't really like anything to sit dead center in the middle. I try to put them off to the sides just a little bit. So you can see the snare is off to the right just a little bit. And you can tell from the volume level, you'll see that the left side here is just ever so slightly larger than the other one. Just a little higher on the left part. And that's how you can tell that it's panned to the left just a little bit. Okay, so I have a second snare that comes in every once in a while, so I'm going to put this to the right just a little bit more so that the snares are on the same side. And then the other things are going to be on the other side. So just a little bit more, nothing too drastic still. The hi-hats, I'm going to keep the hi-hats panned in the middle here because I actually have some random panning going on right here in the controls. So it's automatically bouncing from left to right. You can see by looking at the volume levels on the sides here. So for the open hi-hat, since we put the clap and everything to the right already, for the open hi-hats, I'm going to put those the opposite way. So this is the main open hi-hat right here, so it's just a little bit off to the right. Almost like you saw the clap was a little bit off to the left, or the snare. And then I did the same thing. I put the other open hi-hat that I'm using off just a little bit more, just like I did for that off snare. So I'm just kind of lining things up in the stereo width so they're not all in the very same spot. And those are the main drums. These other little things that I put in the beginning, just for FX and stuff, I don't pan those at all. I just keep them all there in the center. And then this texture I have going, I just decided to put it off to the left just a little bit, just so it wasn't sitting dead center. And this is going to give a lot of room for your drums to breathe and stick out organically. Alright guys, the last thing is getting the volume levels right of all the tracks. This is the most important and the thing you should spend the most time on. And it's always a good idea to listen to your beat, try to get the volumes right for maybe 20 minutes, then take like 5 or 10 minutes off, go do something else, watch a YouTube video, go talk to your roommate, whatever you want to do, and then come back to it, and your ears are gonna be refreshed because you took that little alleviation period on your ears there, and then you're gonna be able to hear the things that you weren't able to hear before. So you can always go back the next day and fix it. Otherwise, once you start practicing and getting good at it, it'll be quick. You won't have to go back the next day. So we're going to highlight a section of the track here that is playing almost everything. So this has all the drums up front and this. It doesn't have the second part of the lead. That's the only thing it's missing, but that's fine because I balanced those together anyways. So we're going to highlight this section right here with this little trackers that Ableton provides, and then we're going to press this button so that it loops. We're just going to go through and make sure everything's lined. So I have this one pretty much set up really well already. And some things that I want you to notice before we start listening to it is that I don't have the snares peaking. I don't have them clipping. I turn the snares down to a relevant level. Same with the hi-hat. Same with the hi-hat levels. You can see it's not up super high. All right, I have everything at a decent level so that not everything has to be crazy and crunchy and sitting above the mix. So just keep that in mind. So really the only two things that are going to be peaking and clipping are the kick and the 808. So let's take a listen through these. So I usually keep my leads right around this level, about half, so that they're sitting nicely about the half range. So that's looking good. And getting your kick and 808 together is a whole thing in itself. You saw the thing I did with the EQing, but we want to make sure the levels are right. So what you want to do is you want to be able to hear the kick with the 808, but you don't want it just to screw everything up, right? You want it to just be that little extra bump with the 808 to make the speakers knock, but you don't need it to be clipped out of control. For example, if we turn this up, let's say you put this at like a -7. So if it's clipping like crazy, you notice how it does not sound the same. Right, that sounds a lot better because it's not dominating that field. Now, if you, on the other hand, were making a song where the 808 was quieter, then you could go crazy with the kick. But in this song, my 808's peaking, so I don't need the kick to go way crazy above that. I just want you to be able to feel that extra bump. So what I'm saying is you don't always necessarily need to clip the kick like crazy. Definitely spend time seeing what works better. Sometimes you might want the 808 to be lower and the click to be higher, but in this case, we're not doing that. You can see my snare is hitting about right there. This one's just a little lower. Same with the hi-hat. Hi-hats are at about 12. These aren't going to be as loud as the hi-hat, but and that texture is playing ever so slightly. Barely tell it's there. Just adding a little bit of background texture. Alright, so these are good starting levels, but every beat's going to be a little bit different, so definitely play around with yours and make sure you get everything to sound good for what you have. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up how you can mix your beat to the best every single time. Just follow those 4 different steps, getting your effects set out, go ahead and EQ out your beat and make sure you're getting any frequencies in there that might clash with the 808, get those out of there unless they need to be. Making sure to pan all your instruments. So you want to pan your instruments, you also want to pan your drums. Pan your drums with that little drum knob, just make sure not everything is stuck in the center. If everything's playing in the center, there is no room in your beat. It's a one-dimensional beat. And then last but not least, the volume levels. Going in there and tweaking all the volume levels over and over again. Spend some time on this. So anyways guys, that wraps this up. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here because we're dropping daily tutorials and you're not going to want to miss out on them. But besides that, I'll be catching you guys again in the next one. Peace out.